Salutations, my swiftacular friends! We're going to be covering some concepts here that aren't going to change the functionality of our app, but they are going to help you write better, more usable, more maintainable code, and they'll lay the groundwork for even more advanced apps. We're going to cover the problem of the massive view controller and how to combat this specifically by leveraging concepts of MVC or model view controller. We'll learn about refactoring for MVC. We'll write more reusable and maintainable code. We'll talk about closures, and we'll write escaping completion handlers. It's time for our massive attack. Let's get going. Well, now that we're using more advanced code and we're working with more view controllers, we also want to make sure that we're writing better code. And one of the problems that we want to pay attention to is, are we creating a massive view controller? It's tempting to load up your view controllers with lots of code, but this isn't the best idea. This creates a project where the code is less reusable, it's harder to maintain, it's harder to find, and it's harder to test. So we're going to learn a few techniques now on how to deal with a massive view controller, and we'll learn more in future videos as well. Now, one approach to designing better code is to use a design pattern. That's a way of structuring your code. And again, when we do this, we want to think about concepts like dry or don't repeat yourself, readability, maintainability, and reusability. Now, one of the most popular ways of thinking about code design is MVC, or Model View Controller. And in this approach, the model holds our custom data structure, so think your custom structs or classes. And the model should also include any methods that operate on that data too, so think about loading data, saving data, or deleting data. Now, the to-do item struct in our code is a good example of the model component of MVC, but right now it doesn't include the load or save methods, but we'll change that in this video. Now, the views in MVC are dedicated just to the user interface, and a good example of that in our to-do list application is the custom table view cell. It just sets up the table view cell. That's it. And when it's called by the view controller has no idea how it's going to be set up. It just says, hey, here's the data, go ahead and set that up. Now, models and views shouldn't communicate with each other directly. That's the job of the controller. It acts as a central coordinator. Now, even though MVC is a design pattern that's used by lots of programming shops and it's one that's favored by Apple itself, in iOS it's a little tough to wrap your head around the design pattern because there's nothing that's called controller. Most of what developers would consider to be a controller is inside of the view controller, and the word view and view controller complicates how we think about that. It's also sometimes challenging to decouple code from the view controller into something abstract like a view. Let's not worry about being super strict with MVC at this stage, but we will begin to modularize our code and work toward the goal of writing better code. And also note that MVC is by no means the only design pattern out there. It is the most popular one in iOS, but there are others out there with names like MVVC and Viper that you can explore as your coding skills improve. So if we think about our model and controller components of our app, and we have to-do item as our model right now, and to-do list view controller is one of our controllers. One of our goals is going to be to extract the load and save functions and move them into the model. Now, we're actually going to run into a little bit of a problem trying to do this because we have to-do items set up as a model, but we don't load and save just one to-do item. We load and save multiple items, all of our items at a time. But we can't put a function inside of this value to-do item that says load up all of our values for all of our to-do items, because to-do item represents just one item. It can't load up or save all of the other items. But what we can do is we can create a new type. It'll be a class, and we'll call it to-do items plural. So inside of this one type called to-do items, what we'll do is we'll create an array of to-do item. Now that's inside this one type. That means anything of type to-do items will be able to hold all of our individual to-do items just in this one variable. And so we can attach methods to it as well. We can say load and save, and it'll apply to all of our to-do items. So this will allow us to move our save data and our load data functions out of the view controller and make them methods of this new to-do items class. Now, while this might sound a bit abstract, but it's going to be a very common approach for us in many of our future apps. So if we're going to be loading or saving multiple items, we'll take our singular data structure, so that's our to-do item struct in our case, and we're going to use this to create yet another custom data type that contains two things. It's going to contain an array of the custom data type, so inside this there'll be another variable that holds an array of that custom type, and it also contains all of the methods used to interact with the data. So for us, it's going to be methods that handle loading or saving, all in this custom class itself, both the array and the access methods. Now, another quick note, Up until now, we've been creating custom data types as a struct, and we've used that as a blueprint to create structs in our data. But you've also heard us refer to the concept of a class as being a blueprint, and that can also create custom data structures, and the things that we create using the class blueprint are referred to as objects. Now, structs and classes are very similar. We'll cover the differences in a future video, so at some point we'll go into more detail regarding structs and classes. If you have been programming before, just to let you know, structs don't support a subclassing equivalent. You can do inheritanceing with classes in Swift. Structs don't require an initializer. You do need an initializer with a class if you've not initialized the variable at declaration. Structs are value types, classes are reference types. In a future video, we'll illustrate this using Chris Wallace, who is also known as Biggie Smalls and Notorious B.I.G. But right now, just consider a useful rule of thumb. It's useful to declare things as a class instead of a struct if you're creating custom data whenever you're accessing data. So if you're saving data to a device, loading data to a device, or accessing data over the internet, the class is typically the way to go, at least for the part that's going to hold your methods. So with that said, let's go ahead and create our first class. I've clicked on to-do item, and we're going to create a new class called to-do items that holds an array of to-do item as well as all the access methods. So I'm going to go up under File, New, File. This is going to be a Swift file because, again, it's a custom data structure for us. We're going to call that to-do items with an S at it for plural. Click on Create, and then inside we set this up with the class keyword instead of the struct keyword. We're going to call it to-do items, open and close curly, and we're going to have one variable in here. It's going to be called item array, and it's going to be an empty array at first. So we'll say colon, open and close brackets. It's an array of to-do item, which is our struct, and it's okay to have structs inside of classes. And we'll say that equals open and close bracket for an empty array for starters. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to migrate that save data function out of to-do view controller.swift and into this new class that I just wrote. So click on to-do view controller.swift. Now we're going to move the save data function over first. That's going to be a little bit easier for us to work with. So why don't you find the function save data inside of to-do list view controller.swift. I'll cut everything out of this except for save notifications. Then go back into to-do items and create a new func save data, open and close parens, passing nothing in, passing nothing out as a return, but with open and close curlies, I'll paste all of these lines inside. Now, Xcode can be really helpful when you refactor like this. We're already getting an error here that says, hey, there's nothing called to-do items inside of this. We're in a class called to-do items, which is the blueprint, but there's no structure with this name. Well, lowercase to-do items was something in the previous class that held an array of to-do item. Here we have the thing that holds the array of to-do item up top. It's that variable items array that we just defined. So we'll replace this to-do items with items array, and the error will go away. Now that we've created this class, let's go back over to to-do list view controller, and let's comment out the old line where we created to-do items as an empty array of to-do item. And instead, below this, we're going to say var to-do items. We'll reuse the same name, but we'll say that equals capital to-do items, the thing that we just created, with open and close parentheses. Now, what this does is it goes to the class factory, creates what's called an object in that variable. So it uses the class blueprint, puts it inside of an object with the same name that we had before. But up top, when we previously referred to to-do items, it was an array of to-do item. Here, we have just one object, one variable that's to-do items. But if we say to-do item dot items array, we're going to be able to access all of the things that we previously did with to-do items. So we're going to have to change every place where we referred to to-do items, and we wanted to get at elements of to-do item. We're going to have to call that now to-do items dot items array. Other than that, though, things are going to work fine, and they're going to work the same way. So now let's scroll down in to-do list view controller. I'm going to go into the extension where we deal with our table view stuff, and we'll start doing those updates right now. So here we are in number of rows in section. We're getting an error in our return statement. Now we used to return to-do items.count, which was the count of an array. Now to-do items is no longer an array. It's a single object, but inside it has a property which is an array. So if we change to-do items to to-do items.items array.count, that'll fix everything. And we're going to do the same thing wherever we refer to to-do items. We're now going to refer to to-do items.items array. So I've copied to-do items.items array, and I'm just going to double click to highlight here in checkbox toggle, and I'll double click on to-do items to highlight it, paste over it with to-do items.items array, do the same thing after the equal sign, replacing to-do items with to-do items.items array. All the errors on this line go away. And I'm just going to go through and find all of the error lines and replace them. So I'll move down to cell for row at. I see I've got one error in here. Be sure to look for that plural and not the singular. So cell dot is the singular to do item. That doesn't need to be replaced. But after the equal sign is to do items, double click on that, Command V to paste. That's fixed. In commit editing style, the first statement inside the if has an error, so I'll replace there. Down in move for row at, the bottom function, we've got to change the first line, the second line, and the third line as well. So that should fix everything in the table view extension. Let's scroll up to unwind from detail. And let's see, the first statement after the if, we've got to change to do items there. So highlight and paste. Then we see we've got in the else statement, I'll highlight and replace to do items in the second line in the else statement, and also replace it in the first line after the else statement. That's everything in the unwind function. Now, could we use find and replace here? We could, but I find it really useful to go through line by line because it refreshes my memory of what's going on inside of my code, as well as the impact of the model change I just made. And now let's go up to prepare for segue. We've got a single change just before the else statement. That's all for that function. I'm going to ignore the change in load data because we're going to copy that over to our new class anyway. But let's scroll up here, and in set notifications we need to do some changes. So I'll highlight in the guard statement, paste and replace the error there. I'll highlight in my for loop, paste and replace my error there. Still got a couple of errors inside of here, so let's see. In the statement below the if statement and in the if statement itself, and also in set notifications, Xcode flags another error in the last line of this if statement. We've got a change where we're referring to to-do items, where that's where we're assigning our new set calendar notification to. Highlight that to-do items and paste over it with to-do items.items array. Now the only remaining errors that we have are down in our load data function. So I'm just going to highlight and command / to comment that out to silence the error. And now watch how we access the save data code that we put in the other class. We're going to refer to the new to-do items object. So we'll say lowercase to-do items, and take a look at code completion. It says the lowercase to-do items has a V next to it. That's a variable. It holds the object. The capital to-do items has a C next to it. It's the class or the blueprint. So we'll press return to accept this object variable and then type a dot. And watch with dot notation. It says, hey, you've got a save data function. It's a method. That's what the M is for. That's what we want. Press enter. That gives the call. By the way, we could have gone ahead in every place where we call the save data function that you see here, replaced it with just this to do items.save data. But since we've already got the call to save data in lots of different locations, and we're only referring to the data structure right inside this function, this will be fine. So whenever we call save data, we spring over and execute the code that's inside of to-do items. Now right underneath this, let's put in our func for load data. So I'll say func load data, open and close parens, open and close curlies, go back over to do list view controller, and I'll uncomment load data. And just to show you, we only call load data once. So unlike save, which is called in several locations, we just call load data in our view did load. So we're going to replace this in just a bit, but let's go back down to load data, highlight it all, Command X to cut out the whole function. Return to to-do items. I'll actually paste the whole function over the function definition I wrote just a second ago. And we do need to make a couple of changes in here. One is down after our do statement, we refer to the old to-do items. Now we want to refer to items array here. Remember, if we scroll up, we've got this property items array. So I'll copy that, just paste that right over the old to-do items. And I've also got an error with the table view down here. So I'm referring to the table view, but there's no table view in this class. I've got to reload data back in the view controller. That's where the IB outlet for table view is. It doesn't exist inside of the model. That's why I'm getting an error. So I'm going to highlight this whole line with the table view on it, Command X to cut it out, go back to my to-do list view controller, scroll back up to view did load. Look, we're getting an error here with load data because that function doesn't exist anymore, but let's backspace over that. How do we get at that function now? To-do items, lowercase to-do items, dot. Sure enough, load data shows up there. Press return to accept that. And then in the line right below, let's paste in our table view reload data. So now if we build and run, our app will work as we want it to. There is a bit of a danger, though, that we might not have all of our loaded data by the time we go ahead and try to reload the table view. If that happens, we might actually try to reload the data before we have any data and we won't see it in the table view. So I'm going to introduce a concept now, and even though it might not be relevant here because we load data very quickly from the device, it's going to be really important when we access data over the internet. So I'll introduce the concept here. You'll see it in several other apps when we access data over the internet where this will be even more important, and hopefully the repetition will be able to help you wrap your head around this because it's kind of a difficult concept to understand. But let's give it a first shot right here. It's about writing trailing closures that are escaping. So here's the problem we're concerned with. We might try to load data on results that we haven't gotten back yet. And hopefully these diagrams will help you see what we're talking about. So we've got our model and our controller. And one of our controllers is called to-do list view controller. It's the first one that executes in our project. We create a model object called lowercase to-do items from our class that acts as a type or blueprint, which is uppercase to-do items. So this lowercase to-do items object starts out life with an empty items array. And it's got a function load data that will load data from the device and place it in the empty items array. So after load data runs, we've got stuff inside of items array. So we run our app. To-do list view controller runs. The first thing it runs is view did load. Now inside view did load, we call to-do items.load data, and this code runs. Now there is a chance if this function takes a while to run to access disk and load data, we might hit this line reload data in the table view before we've got our data back from the load data function. And if this happens, then we'll reload data without any data, so we won't see anything in the table view, even though this data exists on our device and we're eventually going to get it. So what do we want to do? We'd like to attach a little block of code to our load data function and say, hey, don't run this code until I tell you that we've got the data. And then once we've got the data, then you can run that little block of code. And we'll put the table view.reload data inside that code block. Now, a block of code between curlies that's used as a parameter in a function is called a closure. And we've already seen a lot of examples of closures. Think about our animation work where we had UIView.animate. And then there was a bit of code in between curly braces that contained our end state in the animation. That's a closure. Now, a completion handler is a closure that executes when a function says it's completed a task. So here's our load data method that's part of to-do items. And you see the parentheses? Well, we usually pass variables in between the parentheses. We don't have any of those parameters here, but we do have a closure. So that's the stuff between the curlies. Just one line of code right here, but we could put multiple lines of code if we needed it. This is our completion handler. We're not going to call table view reload data until we get a message from load data that says we've completed things. Now, we can write our function this way, but it's more common to see the format down here that's called a trailing closure syntax. Now, this is the same thing as the line above, but if your completion handler is the last parameter in your function, you don't need to enclose the curly braces inside of parentheses. You don't even need the parameter name. In almost all cases, we'll use the trailing closure syntax. Now here's how we're going to modify load data so that we can add a completion handler. The function definition now has another parameter. It's the completion handler. We've got two sets of blank parentheses with an arrow in the middle. This means that there's a closure to be executed after we call load data. The empty parentheses mean we're not passing anything into the closure, and the empty parentheses after the arrow mean there's nothing coming out of the closure either. We'll learn how to pass stuff in a future video. We don't need it now. Now the escaping means we're going to wait until we get a flag that we're done. When we hit the word completed in our code, that's our flag, and that says, okay, now go ahead and execute what you've got in the curlies, our completion handler. Now you see how we've got completed down here? It's highlighted in green. It's after either we successfully decode data using the JSON decoder, or we get an error. If either of those two things happen, we're done, and we should go over and execute our completion handler. Now, our completion handler just loads data in the table view. Even if we get an error, we'll have no data, so we'll just show a blank table view there, but our app isn't going to crash. Let's make these mods. So here we are back in to-do items, plural.swift. We're going to modify the load data function, and we're going to put in our completion handler. Now, a completion handler is a parameter in our function. Now, instead of putting in the name of a type like string or bool or int or double, we're going to put in empty parentheses, arrow, empty parentheses. That means this completion handler isn't accepting anything inside of it, and it's not expecting to pass anything out of the function too. Now we get a little error here. It says, hey, it's an unnamed parameter. We're going to give it a parameter name, and we're just going to call it completed with a colon. And then after the colon, we're going to put in the @ symbol escaping. Here's how to read these changes. So we've added a new parameter. It's named completed. It's a closure, not a standard variable. That means whenever we call load data, it's going to be followed by a set of curlies that have one or more lines of code that are considered to be part of the function call. Not only that, this closure that's signified by completed is an escaping completion handler. That means that we'll execute whatever is in the curlies that we pass into the function after we encounter the word completed in our code below in the function proper. Now we put the word completed with empty parentheses right after it, right after do try catch. So right in here, just before the end of the load data function, make sure you type in completed, open and close parenthesis. That's our flag that says we're done. So there, once we get to that point, we've either updated items array or we've gotten an error. Either way, we're done. We say, hey, it's time to run that closure. Now we need to go back to where we called this method. So we want to go back to toDoViewController.Swift, down here in ViewDidLoad, where we have toDoItems.loadData. But we just changed the way we call this method. So I'm going to highlight toDoItems.loadData, backspace over it, start to type it again, toDoItems. And now look at what we see in code completion. We see a new method, loadData. It shows curly braces with code, which says, hey, there's going to be a closure attached to this. Press return to accept this. Now we can highlight TableView.reloadData, cut that out, put that inside of the curly braces. So that is the code we're passing in as our closure to this function. Now when we call load data on toDoItems, we can hop over to toDoItems.Swift and we can see the function load data that's running. We can see we're looking for completed. Once we hit completed in code, we've either got our data updated or we've got an error. Then we return, then we execute what's inside of the curlies, which is our table view reload. This error just tells us that we need to have the word self in front of to-do inside of the closure. We can have Xcode fix this. Now we can build and run, see how things work. We shouldn't notice any changes. Data loads in no problem. Our view controller has less code in it. Congratulations on some successful MVC style refactoring and for your first exposure to escaping closures completion handlers. So we've moved our load data and save data functions from the controller to the model, and our code is now more modular. Hopefully it's more readable and easier to maintain, and our to-do list view controller is smaller, so we're moving away from massive view controller. And think about the advantages of this. If we ever want to make a change in how our data is saved, right now we save data to our iOS device, but if we ever want to save to the cloud instead so that our data can be shared across all of our devices, well, now that we've restructured our code this way, we only need to make those changes in our model file. So when to-do list view controller makes a call to save data or load data, it doesn't know or even care how or where it's saved. It just wants to get it done. The model takes care of it. We are MVC. So we covered some pretty advanced concepts here. We'll build on them. You'll see them again. So if you struggle to sort of figure out exactly what was going on, hang in there. This will definitely improve our software design, be better at software engineering. Keep at it, coder, and feel proud of what you've been doing.